issues on the table, literally on the table, issues to do with food and health. Alan has some insights that he can share with us as to explain. Maybe we're going about agriculture all wrong. Maybe there are other ways, other philosophies, other paradigms with which to understand agriculture and this elaborate and intricate and amazing ecosystem in which we live and of which we are a part. And maybe some of those insights would help us understand, A, what is going on today, and B, how we could do it better. Welcome, Alan. Welcome back.
Thank you, Laura.
So you wanted to give us the big picture here so that when we examine some of the issues that we see in the headlines today, we will have maybe a larger paradigm with which to understand them, and the possible solutions then also arise as we see headline news from a slightly different view. So give us the big picture.
Okay, I think one of the problems we have now living in our society is that we're being given information either by the scientific community that tries to equate everything down to science, and we have to remember that science follows a very rigorous discipline. It has no room for beauty, per se. It has no room for spirituality, per se. It has no room for understanding the broader picture, subtle energies, etc. So we're now getting information from a very limited resource called science. That's not to say that some people in science don't have a broader picture, but I think in general, most people who are in science today have a more Newtonian mechanistic view. It's a very limited view of what the world is really all about. The other problem we have is we're getting information from governments and or companies that have a vested interest in certain outcomes. So my basic premise is always ask who is giving you information and what's in it for them in order to see whether the information is worthwhile. But perhaps most important, I think it's valuable to look and step back completely before trying to understand these issues. It's very easy to become overwhelmed by the issues. It's very easy to become confused by the issues.
Scared and frightened.
Scared, frightened, discouraged, depressed.
Hopeless.
Which is exactly what certain interests would like you to be, because it makes you more vulnerable and manipulated, more easily manipulated. So my whole point tonight is to try and give people some simple guidelines and a different paradigm to understand what the world's about, so that we can see that there really is hope. There really is hope, and that if we don't follow certain understanding of how nature works, then we can run into problems. If we do, then we have great hope. Differentiate between symptoms and problems. All these things that we see are symptoms, not problems. They are a symptom of a deeper problem. Let's look at the problem.
And those problems are all related.
Exactly. Let's look at the deeper issues here. Every world religion to my knowing, every spiritual belief to my knowing, says that the universe was created by an all-compassionate, all-loving, omniscient being. He, she, it, the nothing, the void, created the universe. Well, if something created the universe, then everything must be part of the universe. So something sacred created the universe, and everything must be sacred. So there's no part of the universe that isn't sacred. The problem with us today is we've lost our ability to see the sacred. I think just to give one example in agriculture, I think there's some great thinkers in the field of agriculture who've said that pests are a symptom of a failing crop, not the cause of it. In other words, by adulterating the soil, by disrupting the natural balance, by eliminating biodiversity and a whole long list of evils and sins, we find that the outcome is that we have pests and fungi, harmful fungi and bacteria. Now here's the interesting part. If you accept that life's a drag and then you die, then you sort of go, well, that's normal. It's normal to have to struggle to grow food. It's normal to have to wage war against nature to get food because life's a drag and then you die. On the other hand, if you sort of go back and say, well, wait, the great compassionate creator created the universe, including ourselves, including nature, and we're here, and we need food in order to survive, then something must be wrong if the production of food has become a war. War is something, I think, that's more created by human beings. It's more through ignorance and lack of understanding. And unfortunately, we've extended our warlike mentality into agriculture. So again, there must be a different paradigm that we can use to better understand how to grow crops and not run into these problems. You have to make something else suffer or die in order to achieve your objectives. So for example, if somebody says to you that the only way that we can find out how we can cure your problem is to experiment on animals, then again, we're looking at making sentient beings suffer in order to find something beneficial for us. I will admit that there's some benefit to that, but again, if you accept the basic premise of the compassionate universe, there must be an alternative. And this is where I think the problem is in our society. We're being presented with problems, which really are symptoms, not problems, and then we're presented with just A or B. In other words, you have the option of A, continue to suffer with your problem, or continuing to have contaminated meat, or continuing to have, pollution, or B, a solution. And the solution generally is to the benefit of the person who is giving the solution. For example, if the industry, the food industry says you can either have meat with problems in it or irradiation. Well, you go, well, okay, what's my options? Well, meat with bacteria in it isn't a real good idea because it's kind of hazardous. And then irradiation, well, if they say it's safe, then it's probably safe, and it's probably safer to irradiate the meat. But again, we're being asked to look at a win-lose scenario. So again, in life, if you're presented with a situation that's a win-lose scenario, risk-benefit scenario, always ask yourself the question, who's presenting me with that scenario?
And who's benefiting from this scenario?
Who's benefiting, who's risk, and who's benefit? Again, if you accept the basic premise of the compassionate universe, there must be an alternative to the people who are listening. Because, by the way, most people like to put all the blame on the government. They should have inspected better. On the industry, they should have known better. How about the consumer? How about you and me? How about everybody who's listening right now? Let's be very, very clear about one thing. Companies can only sell what we buy. I had the opportunity in the States to look at feedlot operations. And the feedlot is where they have a large number of cows, and they fatten them up before taking them to the slaughterhouse. And this summer I had the opportunity to go to the Alps in some of the small villages and have the opportunity to see how some of the animal husbandry practices are done in the French Alps. Now, granted, this is somewhat site-specific, and somebody's going to get into a discussion with me about the amount of grazed land available, and we can get into that. But here we're looking at farmers who have, for example, a home at the base of the mountain, and they have another smaller dwelling midway up the mountain and a very small one at the top of the mountain. And basically what they do with their animals, they move up and down the mountains depending on the seasons. So here we see
and the snow levels.
And the snow levels. So right off the bat, these farmers are much more in tune with nature. They allow their animals to graze in the Alps. So now we're talking about animals that have sunshine, fresh air. The water that they're getting is runoff from the Alps. We know, obviously, full of minerals. It's free of cryptosporidium and giardia and a whole bunch of other wonderful things, because obviously it hasn't come from land that's been fertilized and huge intensive manure applied to it. So they're getting fresh water, fresh running water, water that isn't chlorinated and fluoridated and everything else. They're eating grasses. They're selectively eating what they want to eat. And here's an interesting thing. Cows, of their very nature, are grazers. They're ruminant animals. So why not allow them to do what nature intended them to do? In this country, what we do is we decide that that's not good enough because the cow would take too long to reach maturity, wouldn't put on as much weight. So what we do is we turbo boost the cow. We treat the cow like a piece of machinery. We give it growth hormones, steroids, antibiotics. We throw it full of high-protein materials that it would never eat. We turn the cow that's an herbivore into a carnivore. And so I got a chance to see cows that were allowed to do what they're supposed to do. And basically, the funny thing that I never can understand, if you go and see the doctor and you say, Doc, I don't want to deal in disease, I want to deal in health. What do you recommend? The doc's going to say, clean water, lots of it every day, fresh air, exercise, sunshine, although we can get into the whole sunshine thing. Suddenly nature has now become evil and sunshine is harmful for you, but that's a whole other topic. Sunshine and good food, good, clean, healthy food that has high life force.
The cows are doing just what the same prescription
so the cows are doing
that
the
our doctors prescribe.
Exactly. So oddly enough, the cows that I took pictures of looked like robust, healthy, gentle animals. If you go to a feedlot, I wouldn't recommend jumping into the pen. You're probably risking your life. When I did some work for a large feedlot operation in Idaho, we were working on raising fish, and one day one of the cows got loose, and we thought we'd just sort of walk up to the cow and bring it back to the pen. And the cowboy said, don't even think about getting close to those cows. They're mean and ornery. I'm thinking, why are cows mean and ornery? These are animals that in India are considered sacred, and I don't think that the people in India are keeping raging animals around freely. And in the Alps, my wife and I went into one of the fields, and we walked up to a cow, and the cow didn't run away, and the cow didn't charge us. My wife reached out her hand, and the cow came over and licked her hand. These were not raging animals, and I think you're right. When you abuse and maltreat animals, then you have a completely different temperament. So the temperament of the animal tells you something. So here were cows that had beautiful, shiny coats, beautiful, clear eyes, nothing dripping from their noses, nothing dripping from their tear ducts. I mean, you didn't see huge amounts of fecal material all over them. These were animals that were very healthy. Oddly enough, not only are these animals healthy, but the products from these animals are equally healthy. I saw practices in France, which if they were done here in the U.S., people would be dying like flies. For example, when it came to milking the animals, what they did is they just sort of herded them down to the lower levels, got them in one sort of contained area, and they just came up with a milking truck, drove right up to the side of the field and milked the animals. In this country, it has to be like a sterilized, sanitarized, deodorized operation to meet hygiene standards. So here they are just milking them out in nature. The next thing is in France, they believe that milk is a wholesome product, because God knows it comes from animals that were created by the great creator. What is wrong with a product from an animal that's living in harmony with nature? Well, in France, there's not a problem with raw milk. In this country, raw milk, I think if we got raw milk from our feedlot animals, we'd be dying like flies, or sick. So here's another example. I also went in the Alps to a small little roadside stands where they were selling homemade cheese, milk, yogurt products. None of them were refrigerated. They were all just out on the counter. In this country, if you put dairy products out on the counter, within a short period of time, you're looking at toxic, hazardous material. So why is there this difference? It all begins and ends with the health of the animal. You have animals that are living the way they were intended to be, in harmony with nature, then the animal is healthy, the byproducts from the animals are healthy, and you don't have any toxic materials in the food. In this country, what we've done is we've converted something very sacred, because let's make no mistake, agriculture is something sacred. You are feeding people, and you are maintaining the health of the soil, the health of the animals, the health of the crops, and the health of humanity. And I think people like Dr. Albrecht, who wrote a tremendous number of books, when you undermine the health of the soil, you are accelerating the decline of the civilization. We are basically facing the potential demise of our civilization. That's the bad news. The good news is it's something we're doing to ourselves. The good news is we can change our ways. The good news is we don't have to farm this way. We don't have to treat our animals this way. The good news is we, the consumers, are the ultimate control point. Not in terms of food safety, in terms of buying and monetary power. If we refuse to buy food that's unsafe, nobody's going to produce it anymore. You're not going to produce something that people aren't going to want to buy. And perhaps we'll find that the more subtle our nourishment, the more refined our bodies become, and the more centered our mind becomes. That's just a consideration. One other thing, one question I always ask is there beauty in what we're doing? So, for example, if I look at the cows in the Alps, there's no question there was beauty in that situation. If I look at a feedlot, it is not a beautiful environment.
We are conducting agriculture as though it was a state of war.
And the other thing we're doing is we're conducting agriculture as a business. Now, there's nothing wrong with making money in any endeavor. And I'm not saying that farmers should be non-profit organizations, although some of the small ones feel like they are. But basically, there has to be a reasonable return on investment without compromising quality, human health, and sustainability. What we have done is, through corporate means, we have pushed the equation so that we are compromising sustainability, we are compromising quality, we are compromising human health and safety, we are compromising animal health in the name of return on investment and a good fourth quarter, first quarter, second quarter, or third quarter profit.
Maximizing profits and letting everything else go by way of the bottom line. Sacrificing on the altar of the bottom line.
Correct.
You pointed out that acceptable risk. Now we have agriculture and government talking about acceptable risk. Well, it's not acceptable when it happens to you, or if you're one of the young, the elderly, or the immune at risk. E. coli in meat, or whatever the headline news tells us these risks are. If it happens to you,
it's an unacceptable risk. That's why I always find it
and we're sacrificing people.
Exactly.
We're saying this is acceptable risk in the food industry means people are going to die.
9,000 people a year, give or take, is what the statistics are. So we're saying that the present level of agriculture has an acceptable risk in terms of tonnage produced and cost of food, and one of the byproducts of our current system that allows us this great abundance and this low cost is 9,000 deaths a year. Well, as long as it's somebody else's death, then I guess people go, well, I guess it's an acceptable risk. Unless it becomes your death, then I guess it becomes an unacceptable risk. And that's where I find it sad, is that we're doing risk-benefit in terms of human life. You can't have a dispassionate risk-benefit analysis. You either consider it as your own life or your own loved one's life,